Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon to one and all. Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. Welcome to this panel discussion, Paris Peace Forum 2020. Disinformed no more, fighting infodemics, build form. Sorry, good afternoon.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon to one and all. Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. Welcome to this panel discussion, Paris Peace Forum 2020. Disinformed no more, fighting infodemics, building a reliable infoesfera. That's our title. My name is Caroline Wielman. I'm General Director of the Hirondelle Foundation. It's a Swiss organization that was established 25 years back in order to provide information to people in the throes of a crisis to enable them to act as citizens and on a daily basis. I'm delighted to welcome you here this afternoon with three panelists. They will be sharing with us in a resolute stance against fighting against disinformation. Reliable information are crucial to make sure that we're resilient as a society in the face of a crisis and uncertainty. Hate speech, disinformation can instill a sense of lack of security, and in the long term, speech, disinformation can instill a sense of lack of security, and in the long term, that can throw up upheavals in an experience this year with the coronavirus. So, to grapple with these matters, it's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome Hilde Hardeman. She is Director of Service for Foreign Policy Instruments, the FPI of the European Commission. We have Hilde, who's launched a number of projects to inform and protect populations, particularly those in vulnerable areas, against disinformation. We also have with us Maria Ressa. She is Rappler Chief Editor, based in the Philippines. Thank you very much for being with us, Maria. Rappler Chief Editor, based in the Philippines. From the Philippines, you have received a number of journalist awards and in the front line for denouncing mechanisms of disinformation in the Philippines, but more broadly beyond the Philippines borders. And we also have with us Christophe Deloire. He is Secretary General of the NGO Reporters Without Borders and President of the Forum for Information and Democracy. This forum offers solutions to counter the monopoly of digital platforms in circulating information and propagating disinformation. Disinformation circulates more quickly and more massively than facts and verifiable information. 45 minutes ahead of us. We have a lot of ground to cover. Unfortunately, it won't be possible to take questions from online participants due to a technical hiccup, but I've readied the panel with our three experts here. We have enough to talk about, I think, enough on our plate for the allotted time. So let me start with the first question to the three panelists before us this evening, to establish what considerations are at bay and the risk of the circulation of disinformation and what do we know now. Hilde, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm really honored to be here with such great professionals together in this panel. Listen, information and means of communication have always been used to further political goals and win hearts and minds, to nurture peace or to fuel conflict. This is, I think, as old as mankind itself. And we also all know that reliable information can save lives and that disinformation can kill. What is different now as compared to, let's say, 1,000 or 100 or 50 years ago is that social media and virtual tools allow news to spread super fast with near unlimited reach and make it very easy for those who wish to spread false information, be it individuals, organizations, states, to do so very effectively. And the pandemic is further accelerating this trend. Now, what is at stake? At stake are our freedom to think and to make choices as individuals, our rights, our health, our dignity. And at stake are also the values on which our societies are based: democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights. As was the case with the emergence of the printing press, with radio, with television, our digital tools can really bring a lot of positive things to many people, and we must nurture and encourage that. At the same time, we must do all we can to counter efforts to use these tools for conflict and for strife, for undermining our values and our societies. So harmful content, extremist propaganda, hate speech, incitement to violence or disinformation campaigns, often distributed via social media and messaging apps, has inevitably real life implications, and those can be very serious indeed. A few examples: the violence in Myanmar against the Rohingya community, farmer herder clashes in Nigeria, recruitment efforts of Islamic State in many countries, disinformation related to elections, live streaming. Imagine live streaming of hate attacks in Christchurch, New Zealand, or in Halle, Germany, and now very recently the discrediting of potentially very important life-saving vaccines in many places. All parts of the world are affected by this, but in conflict-affected areas where digital literacy is often still rather young, where access to information and freedom of expression have often been restricted, the consequences of such viral, harmful online contents are really particularly serious. And the COVID-19, as I said, is exacerbating these trends. The risks these trends pose to lives are very serious indeed, and we need to be strongly aware of them and act upon them. Now, to counter these negative trends, fostering critical thinking, independent journalism, conflict-sensitive reporting are all crucial, and so is a robust regulatory framework. At the same time, we need to establish early warning and debunking systems to identify and counter disinformation. Media professionals, civil society, the private sector, states and international organizations all have a role to play, and in doing so we must all be conscious of challenges to privacy and to protection of personal data. Now, we will discuss further later on how to tackle these challenges, but let me maybe conclude these first thoughts by letting you know that the team in the European Union that follows this information, in particular Stratcom as we call them, will come in the next few days with a public report on how they assess this information in the context of COVID. And you will not be surprised, there's nothing new under the sun at all. We see lots of conspiracy theories about why there is the pandemic, what is the purpose of the lockdown. We see lots of discrediting of vaccines, and it's important to say also by state actors. So anything that you can expect here. Now with this, I would conclude my my answer to my thoughts on your first question. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Hilde. Christophe, I'd like to pick up on what Hilde has said. At stake here, the danger is battering the gates of democracies and how to live together in our societies. Why did we call it Information and Democracy, your forum? What should be done and what is imperiled within our democracies with going to this matter of disinformation? Democracy involves a certain variety of functions. The electoral process is an important point, but also public discussions, the access to the law, reliable information, These are crucial in a democratic society, and without them, there is no democracy. And it comes as no coincidence when you look at the last 25 years. Democracies are now in a crisis. And why is that the case? Well, first and foremost, it's the crisis of being able to talk, discuss, without insulting each other, without throwing mud at each other, without calling for hate, incitement, and using rumor. All these negative points that are ballooned on the social media. So how do we exit that state of affairs? Now, Maria Ressa, who is with us this evening, she will be helping us to do that. There'll be other people. 2 years back, we launched an initiative on information and democracy. To say in a word that we find ourselves in a cacophony, an informational chaos. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that this digital forum is deregulated. All content would find it very difficult if it's in competition, publicity, government propaganda, journalist articles and rumour. This is unprecedented in a democracy. It's never been seen before. And so it begs the question, how as citizens in a democratic country, how have we contributed to that state of affairs? And how can we now underpin things at a time when digitalization is part and parcel of the democratic process? So with Maria, we have laid down principles of what should be imposed in the Global and Communication Forum. This has become an international partnership on information and digital. 28 countries, a forum, a democratic coalition, which is borne up by civil society, and which says, in a word, that these considerations are so new. No parliament currently in the world has found a way to regulate all this, because at the end of the day, the instruments of regulations of the past no longer work. Therefore, we need to innovate, and to do that, we need people dotted around the world from different profiles, legal experts, researchers. They all need to work together to draft recommendations. And if we are here and now today talking about this, it's because tomorrow the Forum on Information and Democracy will be putting forward to the Alliance for Multilateralism, the foreign ministers, giving the work on infodemics. It's a first round of work, rumors, propaganda, circulating particularly in the backdrop of pandemics, but not only. This work has been conducted thanks to a steering committee that was co-chaired by Maria Ressa and Barry Kitterchak. Fabulous work, sterling work, 250 recommendations have been made with a view to regulating. In a meeting such as this, of course, we can talk about tangible things that we can offer. Thank you very much. Maria Ressa, as a journalist, and on a daily basis, you're confronted with editorial decisions, verifying facts when thinking about public opinion or lies. What's your experience of this disinformation, and what impact has it had on your daily practice as a chief editor and journalist, which no doubt has prompted you to get on board with this information democracy initiative in the first place, madam?
So, Caroline, thank you so much for the question, but it's very hard for me to hear everything that was said. The French translation is a little too loud and I couldn't hear, sorry, the French was too loud, could not hear the English translation. What I heard you say is you asked, how the lies have impacted what we live through as a journalist. And that's an easy one. I think you can look at our case and see how since 2016, I've literally been jumping up and down to say that we are at an alarming point, an existential moment. The level of lies are spreading faster and further than facts. And in my own personal experience, what we've seen is, in 2016, which is roughly when President Duterte was elected in May, Brexit happened a month later, and then we went on. The first domino that fell, I would say, came from the Philippines. And in 2016, if you just look at it, we challenged two huge power centers, President Duterte and the Philippine government, in terms of a very brutal drug war, and Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg for the propaganda war, for the weaponization of social media. In 2016, two things happened. I was, when we came out with a series, I was personally attacked. And as soon as we finished this 3-part series looking at the weaponization of the internet, I received an average of 90 hate messages per hour, not a month, per hour. And that lasted through most of 2016. That kind of bottom-up attacks they were meant to do two things: silence me and Rappler, and it does make you, it's a new weapon, and women in the Philippines have been targeted at least 10 times more than men. That's the first, is to have a personal impact on you. And then the second is to create a fake consensus, manufactured consensus, a bandwagon effect that tears down trust in media, for example. And then I guess before I turn it back to you, I just want to show you how narratives form and how they change reality over time. This is exactly the same thing that we're seeing happen in the United States. I lived through it in 4 years. In 2016, the narrative of the disinformation networks, the attacks against us, is journalist equals criminal. That's when it was seeded in 2016. And in 2016, I could laugh because I thought, oh, well, my track record will stand by me and people will remember. Well, I shouldn't have laughed, because by 2017, President Duterte himself came top down and repeated the same lies coming up. Within a week of President Duterte saying that in his State of the Nation address, we got our first subpoena. 2018 followed with 11 cases that were filed against me and Rappler, so the government moved. Weaponization of the law. 2019, I received 8 arrest warrants. By February, in about 5 weeks, I was arrested twice and detained. And those cases are ongoing. And then in 2020, journalist equals criminal. I was convicted June 15th in a Manila court along with a former colleague. It was for a story we published in 2012 at a time when the crime we allegedly violated wasn't even enforced. It had just been passed and was being challenged. It's a story I didn't write, edit, or supervise, right? So now I have to deal with almost 100 years maximum prison for these politically motivated charges. We'll keep fighting them in court, but it changes people's minds. And I think this is the greatest danger. The world's largest distributor of news is Facebook. That is how we get news and information. And yet, the design of these social media platforms work against facts. They are biased against facts. Lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. That's shown in all the research. So this is the fundamental problem, and that is what Christoph, I believe, spoke about, where we tried to look for systemic solutions, because without facts, there is nothing humanity can do. We can't have democracy without systemic solutions, because without facts, there is nothing humanity can do. We can't have democracy without facts.
Recognizing facts so that you can debate them and, if need be, agree to disagree. This is one of the missions of media and journalism. Can debate them and, if need be, agree to disagree. This is one of the missions of media and journalism. Fight against disinformation. Are there any lessons that we can draw from what is being done currently? And can you tell us what still has to be done? And with regards to your program to inform and support the population, the people, what lessons have you drawn from that program? Has there been a positive effect, positive outcome of the efforts that you've made so far?
Thank you very much, Caroline. And of course, after the very, very concrete input from Maria, at the risk of sounding rather theoretical, So a lesson that we draw from what we have been doing in the COVID-19 crisis on disinformation, information, is really how vital access to reliable and transparent information to facts is, and also how much digital tools in the end can unite. They do not only divide. The same channels that hold risks in terms of harmful content hold also enormous opportunities for better communication of reliable facts and for broad inclusion. These are things that we have seen through our work in a number of conflict-stricken areas, and it is something that we really feel we need to make the most of, something to which we all can and must contribute. If we look at the infodemic related to COVID-19, as we all know, it's particularly visible, particularly harmful. And we also all know that it's definitely not the first and also not the last example. So we have to make sure, as Christophe and Maria said, that we are well equipped to deal with this type of phenomenon. We need to educate in fact-checking. We need to multiply reliable information and debunk false information. We need to foster critical thinking, that is crucially important, and public resilience. And as has been said, we need to engage the social media platforms. Some of them have opened units that deal with human rights, that deal with conflict, and we should work with them to help them integrate better in the peace-building community. We should proactively engage, but very importantly, as Maria and Christophe have said, we need to hold them accountable as any actor that has such broad and deep global influence. And of course, clearly, media professionals, and I'm very honored to be with such top media professionals here, are absolutely key actors in identifying harmful content, in providing reliable information. So for us, additional resources and training to build the capacity of media professionals, especially in vulnerable communities, is for us one of the best investments we can make to facilitate the dissemination of reliable information, fact-checking, and the promotion of peace and mutual support. The initiative that Maria with Marietje Schaake, Christophe is taking is extremely important in this regard. Fact checkers, civil society organizations, and grassroots activists, they all play essential roles in providing reliable information, debunking false information, and also, very importantly, creating early warning mechanisms that can alert citizens, media, social media platform, and authorities about potentially harmful content. For instance, in our work in Iraq, we have seen that fact checkers alerted the Ministry of Health to warn that there was false information circulating relating to the pandemic. And we have seen that all these actors together, the authorities, civil society, have made sure that in the end this was set right, and that there is now much more, that people are much more alert for having correct information. Then, more generally, nurturing broader public resilience to divisive rhetoric and fostering critical thinking. These are things that one has to learn from the moment that one is a small child, but one can learn it also later on. It's crucial. And I would also like to underline that dealing with disinformation on the one side and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, starting with the freedom of expression, really go hand in hand. So disinformation tackling disinformation does not at all mean that you need to limit the freedom of speech. On the contrary. And in all of this, as it has been emphasized, we need a robust regulatory framework. We all need principles and mechanisms to protect our lives and information information in cyberspace. Now, at a time when risks may affect large numbers of individuals simultaneously in different jurisdictions, closer forms of cooperation between authorities at the international level can help ensure both a vibrant information ecosystem and more effective protection of individual rights and data. So, like we do every day in our physical lives, we need also in the digital world, we need to find the balance between freedoms on the one hand and protection on the other hand, based on shared principles and clear, transparent rules. The EU has significant experience already, and we are very happy to share that. But I would like to add that the European Commission is also well aware of the fact that more needs to be done. So further developing a regulatory framework in this context, one that respects human rights, the rule of law, is something that is very high on the agenda of the European Commission. So I would say more to follow on this. That's all on my end. Thank you.
Merci Hilde.
Thank you, Hilde. Christophe, what have you been able to do or to initiate on this issue to make the platforms more accountable, more transparent, and in attempting to define either a national or international regulatory framework in your working group or within your initiative? Has anything concrete been done?
A few years ago, and even a few months ago, a lot of people said, politicians, journalists, etc., we have to give responsibilities to platforms. They have to be responsible. But the question is, based on what? Based on which principles? Responsibility is not just something from scratch. You have to be responsible to comply with something. So we need a reference, and that there was a huge lack regarding this. So that's why we launched this initiative on information and democracy, working with Maria Ressa. That's why tomorrow we will publish this report with 250 recommendations about what you mentioned, Caroline: transparency of platforms and algorithm, principles for the content moderation. How can we have a guarantee that content moderation is appropriate, that platforms do not censor too much, or on the contrary, do not keep hate speech on the social networks. We also decided to deal with how to concretely promote trustworthiness of news and information. How do we impose to platforms a prohibition of conflicts of interest? Because there is no guarantee today that the way the algorithm functions, the way it reveals the reality, is not influenced by the interest, by the commercial business interests of the company. So this is the reality is today showed through the social networks according to a business logic. This is not now the organization of the public space, of the public square, is based on a commercial logic and not anymore on a democratic logic. That's how those recommendations could help. And finally, there is a new challenge, which is private messaging systems. Of course, we have to protect privacy. We have to protect absolutely the secret of messages between two individuals, three individuals, when you exchange with people you know. But private messaging systems are also used to just amplify disinformation. You can transfer and multiply the transfers, and you enter, in this case, into a public space logic. What do we do with this? There are many, many answers in this report. So now we have solutions. We are in a period when, as Hilde Hardeman said about Europe, but this is true about other countries or areas, there are laws to be passed, there are projects, Digital Charter in Canada, Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act in Europe, Section 213 in the US, Section 79 in India, etc. But that's the key moment to have appropriate regulations, because we need regulation, but we need regulation that is not dangerous for press, for freedom of expression, for democracy. So the question is, which laws will be passed? And all the people who want to defend democratic values have really to consider that this is a key challenge. Climate change is a key challenge for humanity, but this one, or the way we collectively debate, is another key challenge, and this is really a key moment too.
Merci.
Thank you. If I understand well, the question and the solution is not just technological, it's also political. Maria, among the recommendations and the initiatives that we have, it's clear that one can be acting at different levels, to intervene at different levels to try to resolve the issue of disinformation with governments, with media, with individual journalists on an individual level, and also with the citizens directly. Where do you think we should be putting the priority? What should be the priority?
So we look at this in three different layers. The first is if we can stop the lies, so this is tech. The second is if we can continue making sure the facts, that power is held to account, the journalism survives. And then the third one is that civil society gets the facts it needs, right? Civil society organizes. But, you know, before I go to the solution, can I just reframe it just slightly by looking at how different this information ecosystem is from anything we've ever been used to? Think about it this way. I think 3 points. One is that in the world we all knew, journalists, the gatekeepers of the public sphere, were accountable for lies. If people believed lies, the reporter could be sued, the publication can be sued. Journalists have lost their gatekeeping powers, and that's been taken by tech. But the problem is tech abdicated responsibility for protecting the public sphere. And so what happened then is that it went one step further. This is not the old world where you have just a highway, right? This is the design of the technology platforms are fitted to the weaknesses of the human psyche. So neuroscience plays a role in this. Think of social media as behavior modification platforms, because that's literally what they do, right? If you watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, 35 million households, I think, have watched it since it was released, right? But what it does is it shows you that when you put your data, we tend to look at only the content, the first layer of data. We read it and we think that's it, but there's a second layer of data, and that is the connections, the model that is built of you. So first, you put in all your thoughts into your social media platform, that a machine learning comes in and creates a model that knows you better than you know yourself. Then that model of you then is pulled up by artificial intelligence, and your weakest moment to a message is sold to a company or a country. Your weakest moment to a message. And then you are nudged with that message. And when you react, your reaction, whether you accept it or you don't, feeds back into the second layer of data. And it's a perpetual machine, right? So think of, again, it's a behavior modification system. It's ongoing social experiment with insidious manipulation for every citizen around the world. That's the way to look at the technology, and why the business model, why predictive behavioral analytics is dangerous. And then I think the second thing is, I don't think we should get rid of these platforms because technology can be used for social good, right? I had hoped that technology would jumpstart development in the Philippines. That was why we set up Rappler in 2012. That's why we're Facebook partners. We're fact-checking partners of Facebook. But the problem is that this business model and greed has a real-world impact because it changes the way we think. And that really is the biggest thing. It has now built into the design, torn apart our societies. What spreads fastest are conspiracy theories. And you'll see the same thing happening in the United States that happened to us. The conspiracy theories of voter fraud, for example, seeded on RT coming out of President Trump, and people, conflict, the polarity of situation. It is dangerous. So I guess the last part is, so how do we solve this, right? That's why we spent the last few months working with some of the best minds. Sina Naral is part of the committee. He just wrote a book, published it, called The Hype Machine. There are many other, Christopher Wiley, the former Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, helped on this endeavor. Anya Schifrin, Media and Society. I think this is one of those moments where we're faced, it's an existential moment for facts, which means it's an existential moment for democracy. And if we can then turn the lies off, like the virus, if we can at least flatten the curve of the lies, then the journalists can do our jobs and the attacks against us will diminish and the distribution of the facts can bloom. After that happens, then civil society needs to get stronger. This isn't one of those moments where all you do as a voter is vote, right? This is one of those moments where you have to ask yourself the same question that I asked myself 4 years ago, which is, what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Because that's truly where it is. Sorry, I can talk about this forever because I feel like it's like 75 years ago when an atom bomb went off. And globally, we need to find a solution.
Merci.
Thank you. We have just under 10 minutes left. We realize full well that this is a global problem. We've seen in the United States, in Europe, in the Philippines. A part of people in the world are less exposed to platforms and social media. I'm thinking of parts of Africa and Asia that are less connected. Are those countries aware? Have they been made aware of the issues? Are they on board with the initiative Information Democracy, or is this a northern country problem? No, this is not a northern problem or a northern country problem. The fact that the public debate has been made more fragile and the propagation, spreading of rumors has a very strong impact in those countries where political systems are more fragile. So one cannot say that it's a problem just of northern countries. I think it's very well understood and perceived in countries that maybe are less important in the geopolitical scene and maybe would have more difficulty imposing democratic principles to the functioning of platforms. So that's why we need international coalitions, precisely for that reason, but also for a second reason, because there's a danger, the danger that comes from private interests, because the platforms are under the influence of private interests and that have been the backing of governments. And I'm speaking of the entities themselves. Then there's the other problem, despotic regimes. They're trying to impose their way of handling information, Beijing and China first and foremost. So we need a coalition of democratic countries in order to make secure an international democratic space for deliberation Of course, democracy for others is a national issue. So we're not talking about just coming back or getting back to a national space, what we need to do in terms of political strategies to have a democratic space that is as broad as possible, as international as possible, that can resist and stand up to despotic regimes. And this is why there's a coalition that appropriately brings together southern and countries of the south and the north. We have South Korea, South Africa, Chile, Canada, and European countries. And that's a coalition of the 38 countries that have signed the International Partnership on Information and Democracy, and that can play today a very important, a truly important role. And it's been decided that these countries should meet yearly for a conference of the parties of sorts, and we will make sure that that takes place. Thank you. Maybe other international conferences I have in mind next week, the Second World Conference for the Freedom of Media that will be co-organized by Botswana and Canada. And this is following on and then the next conference in London can again pick up this topic of disinformation and international alliances. Then there's the International Day of Freedom of Expression and Freedom to Inform of May 3rd that was postponed to December because of the pandemic. And hopefully, this will be another moment where we can again recall these what's at stake and to remind civil society, media, and citizens that this issue has to really be put at the top of the agenda. And given the global agenda, and given the issues, the problem of disinformation and infodemics is absolutely first and foremost. And it has very harmful consequences and can have even more harmful consequences in the future. I think we're almost at the end of our time. I would like to thank all of you. We've seen that disinformation is not a new phenomenon. Rumor, lies, manipulation of opinion have always existed. And the fact that some would closet people in convictions and beliefs is nothing new, but the new technologies and algorithms of the digital platforms have simply exacerbated this phenomenon. This is true for all countries, for all political systems, but for fragile countries, for countries in conflict, we can see that the effects can be even more harmful. Independent media journalists who are relaying the facts are simply overtaken by the speed, the resources, and the ability of the actors who are dominating the media system and ecosystem. So the solution is not just technological, but it's also political, societal, and economic. I would like to thank our panelists once again for being with us tonight. I do apologize for participants who were not able to ask questions. I hope that our exchanges were interesting for them. The organizers of Paris Peace Forum would like to thank you, and I would like to thank them for having put this topic of disinformation in their program to move to a better world where reliable, useful information is available to all. I thank you all, and I wish you a good evening. Thank you.